So our last content lecture for our course is dealing with inequality. So inequality might refer to different things. There's income inequality. So that's the idea that some people make a whole lot more than other people. So you might hear about tech CEOs who make 100 times as much as the low-level employees within their company. That would be income inequality, looking at how much difference there is in what people make. There's also wealth inequality. That's referring to differences in how much people have in terms of assets. And so wealth is something that is obviously related to income, but income is something coming in as kind of a stream. Wealth is what you have. If we're thinking about a bathtub analogy, income is the water coming into the bathtub. There's going to be expenses. That's going to be the money the water draining out of the bathtub. The level of water within the bathtub, that is your wealth. That's how many assets you have, kind of your net worth, if you want to think of it that way. So generally speaking, there's way more wealth inequality than income inequality. So income inequality is quite high in America. Traditionally, countries like Brazil, South Africa, countries like China, they have a lot of income inequality. US has a lot more than, say, Europe, where countries have less income inequality. US is somewhere in between, although it's closer to Brazil and such than to Europe these days. That was less true in, say, the 50s in the post-World War II era. But wealth inequality is much more drastic than income inequality. So you know, the wealthiest people have huge amounts of money, big piles of money that they're sitting on, where a large portion of the population has essentially no net worth, very little in the way of assets. They don't own their home, or if they do, it's really not worth much at all, or it has a mortgage that's as big as the value of the house itself. You know, they may have a car or something, but they may also have credit card debt, and so a large portion of the population in the US, and certainly worldwide, even more so, a lot of people have very little wealth, where other people have wealth that's been passed down many, many generations. I mean, you could think of, say, the British royal family, right? They have hundreds of millions of dollars, not because they earn a lot, but because they inherited a lot, and it's invested. So it is earning on that investment, but it's not punching in at a 9-to-5 like you and I might do. So income inequality, wealth inequality, which is even more drastic, we can think about this on a local or, say, national scale, or we can think of it on a global scale. And so as you get to bigger areas of comparison, you tend to see bigger differences, more inequality, right? So if you compare people across the world, then people who live, say, at the poverty line in the US, I believe that's something like $24,000 for a household of average size, or maybe a couple member household. So if you live around that, that would be quite wealthy by a lot of international standards. And that's because the US is a very wealthy country, right? So we have quite a bit of inequality within our country, but our country is, without a doubt, wealthy. If we're comparing it to any other country or any other time in history, we live in a very wealthy place. And so, you know, there are a lot of people in the world who live on less than a couple dollars per day. And you can adjust for purchasing power parity, which means we're basically trying to look at, you know, how many loaves of bread and apples and how much housing you can get for each dollar that you have, because prices are going to be different in different countries. But even adjusting for that, we have a lot of people in the world living on less than $2 a day. which, I mean, that's obviously way lower than where our poverty line is. That is making it by without a whole lot. And this is one of those areas where I'll draw from some of my personal experience. I've been fortunate to be able to travel lots of places, including a lot of places where there are a lot of people living on a couple dollars a day. Rural places in sub-Saharan Africa, places in southern Asia, in India, and Southeast Asia, slums in a lot of these, surrounding a lot of these big cities, where you have people who, they have no property that they own. They are basically squatting. They've created the houses out of essentially found materials. If they have electricity or water, it is not obtained legally. It's something they've kind of created their own little grid for electricity and spliced wires and gotten an electric feed that way. And often these families are living on diets of a lot of rice and beans and lentils and the sort of thing where eating meat is a big luxury. So that's really different than the U.S., where we think of a lot of the families below the poverty line that are kind of living paycheck to paycheck and struggling financially by our standards. Very often we talk about food deserts in the U.S., and I worked in inner city Chicago after college and before going to graduate school. And so I worked in neighborhoods that were some of what we call food deserts, where there's no grocery store, there's no Kroger or Publix or nice sort of regular full-scale grocery store anywhere nearby. You have to go many blocks on public transit that doesn't have great options very often in these neighborhoods. It's hard to get to the grocery store to buy what we think of as staples, what we think of as most healthy food. If you're living on a tight budget, it's really difficult to go get that food that you need. The easiest option in a lot of these neighborhoods are actually things like there's neighborhood convenience stores that have canned foods and essentially junk food, you might call it, chips and candy and soda. There are also fast food places that they've got dollar menus, and you don't need a ton of money in your pocket to be able to get a lot of calories. They're calorie dense sort of meals, but it's very different if we think of a lot of these food desert neighborhoods in the U.S. that, not surprisingly, have really high rates of obesity and diabetes and a lot of bad health outcomes, partially associated with the difficulty in getting nutritious food, being able to afford it, being able to access it, and a lot of places in other parts of the world where the families are living on, they buy a 50-pound bag of rice and a bunch of dried beans or lentils, and that is the main part of their diet for a long time for a lot of people. Those are quite different scenarios. Now, how do we think about this in a moral issues of capitalism class? Obviously, part of what's going on is the market system that we live in. In most of those countries I was visiting, there was a market system, at least of sorts. It's always on a scale, but at least some element of a market economy where they're buying, say, the food that they want to eat. They're paying for their housing either in labor or in money. So how do we think about how our economic system is related to these inequalities and what that means when it comes to ethics and the moral issues that come up with these sort of situations. So here again we get to kind of we can contrast an egalitarian sort of perspective with a libertarian sort of perspective. So the egalitarian would say everyone deserves something. Everyone has intrinsic worth as a human, and they have positive rights, we would say, to food, to shelter, maybe to medical care. We talked about that before. So the egalitarian would usually, most egalitarians would not say everyone needs to have exactly equal stuff. That's a very extreme form of the argument. Some people have made it, some people believe it, but most would say everyone deserves at least a basic level. At least rice and beans available, and housing that they don't have to worry about being evicted or a bulldozer running it over, or a strong wind blowing the roof off. So reasonable housing, reasonably secure, reasonably stable, food with at least a baseline of nutrition value, clean water, another big one that comes up. Some people would include healthcare, many people would include education. So all of those things, if you believe in kind of an egalitarian and you believe that there are positive rights, people have a right to certain things, that means that we need to all work to make sure that happens. We predominantly do that through our government, but we may also do a lot of that through private activity, volunteering, donating, things like that. Now, a libertarian perspective is based on the idea of negative rights. Now, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, those are negative rights. Those are saying no one can interfere with your right to do certain things. It's not saying you have the right to stuff. It's saying no one can mess with you regarding certain stuff, which can sometimes be kind of a subtle difference, but it's an important one. So the libertarian perspective of negative rights is saying the government shouldn't be getting in your way of free speech, of being able to practice the religion that you choose, of the government shouldn't be able to throw you in prison without putting you through due process and giving you certain rights. So the South African government, the constitution in South Africa is one that is much more built on positive rights. It includes some negative rights, like the right not to have infringement on your free speech and things like that. But it also has positive rights. It has, everyone in this country has the right to education. Everyone has the right to get married to whom they want. Everyone has the right to do a lot of things that are much more egalitarian in nature. Now, that's the de jure, what the law says in South Africa. The de facto, the lived experience of a lot of people may not accurately reflect that. But it is certainly a constitution based on a much more egalitarian sort of mindset, one that says there should be less inequality. Everyone should at least have this basic level of quality of life. The libertarian perspective is basically everyone should have an opportunity to do what they want to do, to make their own choices. And other people, again, there are a lot of negative rights. People shouldn't infringe on their ability to make those choices. And some people are going to succeed and some people aren't going to succeed. And that's part of having a lot of freedom to choose for yourself. And so that's the flip side. Well, that's the other end from the egalitarian perspective when it comes to inequality. A libertarian would generally say, we may have a lot of inequality. We actually kind of expect a lot of inequality because people have a lot of freedom to choose what they want to do, and some people have priority to make a lot of money, to amass a lot of wealth. Other people don't have that same priority. Even if people have the same priorities, they're in different situations, and so some people may be successful and others may not. They have different abilities. They have different, backgrounds, inherited positions, whether you're talking about genetic or wealth. And so the libertarian perspective is much more, inequality in many ways flows from giving people a lot of freedom to choose the path they want to be on and make choices that they want to make without a bunch of people telling them what to do, especially the government infringing on their freedom to choose important aspects of their own life. Now, a libertarian would probably say a lot of people are going to choose to donate money, to volunteer, to help those in need. They don't have to, and the government shouldn't be playing an active role from the libertarian perspective. People should be free to make that choice, of course, if they want to. If you want to be active in the church that supports the homeless, great. If you want to donate money to education in Africa, great. The libertarian would say individuals should be driving those choices. It shouldn't be the government forcing people to do things by taxing them and then using the money that way. But so that's kind of the core issue. We've seen it before with a lot of personal liberty sort of things, gun rights, prostitution, drugs, immigration. It largely comes down to an egalitarian fairness sort of mindset versus a libertarian personal liberty sort of mindset. The way that you think about inequality is probably very closely related to that because it's built on some kind of similar issues. Now, addressing inequality, if you're coming from an egalitarian mindset, there's going to be a big role for the government, for the United Nations, for international organizations like that. If you're a libertarian, again, it's going to be a much more private decision maker sort of solution. We'll look to charities, we'll look to people who choose to volunteer, to donate, to things like that, to help address the people who really need help. An egalitarian would say inequality in and of itself is problematic. It creates frictions and bad feelings. It gets in the way of people being able to participate in the political process in fair sort of ways. The libertarian would say, yeah, we kind of expect these differences. Not that they're inherently good, but the freedom to choose is the really important thing, and what flows from that is, we expect to have big differences in income, in wealth, even in power within the political process. And so, of course, people disagree on certain elements of that, but that's kind of the nutshell of where we are with inequality, how we tend to wrap our heads around it, how it relates to some of our previous topics. And with that, we'll end our substantive lectures for this short course on moral issues in capitalism. So I want to say thank you. I am going to be posting a short video talking just a little bit more about the final paper, kind of what I'm looking for, what I expect with that. But thank you guys for joining me in this course, and I will be in touch with you soon.